Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Parallax Abstraction, and welcome to another episode of Retro Flashback, showcasing gaming's roots for a new generation. Today we are going to be taking a look at the first TurboGrafx-16 game for the show, and also the first racing game. Well, not really the first racing game, I guess. F-Zero was definitely a racer, just a bit more of a crazy future sci-fi racer. This is a little bit more grounded in reality, I guess. So, this is Victory Run, and yeah, the TurboGrafx was a really interesting system. It was a joint venture between NEC and Hudson Soft, and Hudson Soft released the vast majority of the games for the system. It was a weird combination. It was kind of spec-wise halfway between the Nintendo and the Super Nintendo. It had some things better than the NES, but other things that were definitely not as good. And it hung around for a couple of years, but it never really got a lot of developer support, never got really popular, and it's a shame. I owned one of these systems for a while and had a bunch of games for it, and it had some really, really good games. I really liked this system. And this is an interesting title. This was Hudson Soft's answer to Sega's Outrun and a bunch of other racing games of that ilk. But it has its own little unique differences from Outrun and other games like Rad Racer for the NES. That's what I was thinking of, was Rad Racer. This added its own little twist to it, though, and it was very interesting. This is by no means a perfect game. It's pretty flawed, actually, in some ways, but it is pretty cool. So we're going to check it out. This game is actually supposed to depict the Paris-Dakar Rally, the famous rally race that takes place every year. It's a famous and brutal rally race. It actually involves a bunch of different classes of vehicles, but in this game you're only playing a car. But you're going to see right off the bat here what I'm talking about with the unique twist. So, first off, you pick your name. Now, here's where things get a little interesting. So, you see down here that we got these things called support parts, yeah? So, what this is now, this looks like upgrades, right? In that you're putting points into all these little things in order to make your car just perform better and, you know, be better in its given categories, right? Well, that's not really what it is. These are not support parts, they are repair parts. Basically what happens is, as you progress through the game, your car will take wear and damage. Some of that from wrecking, some of it from just driving aggressively and whatnot. And what's interesting is, when you buy these parts, you can have as many as you want in any category, up until 20. But what you're doing is, you're buying repairs. So, in between checkpoints, if you have components that are damaged, you can expend one of these support parts in order to repair it back to health, basically. But the thing that's really gnarly about this, and this is where this game's challenge comes from. This game is really, really hard, by the way. I've never finished it. I've never come close. And where things get interesting is that you don't get any more of these support parts. So you only get to use these at checkpoints, not midway in between them. And when you use one, it's gone. You don't get any more. So if you don't distribute this correctly and you run out of support parts before you complete the full rally, you're kind of boned. So it's very unique, and it's very challenging because you only get one shot at this. So you really have to sort of analyze your driving style and figure out the best way to accommodate this. It's really, really interesting. But it is only one of the various mechanics that make this game challenging. So, I've picked out this is a layout that works generally pretty well for me, but your mileage may vary. No pun intended. Okay, it was intended. But, yeah, let's get this rolling. So, second mechanic, you're going to see right now. Off I go, right? See my RPM revving up there? Now, you see how the gears are being shifted? I'm doing that. This game does not have an automatic transmission, like a lot of racing games did, including very many from this era. The shifting mechanic is very, very simple. It's just up and down on the D-pad to shift up and down. But you do have to manage that, and it can get really, really hairy because this game requires precise driving. You can't just gun it around every corner. You've got to be very, very careful. As you can see, this game graphically is not all that hot. And the perspective can get really tricky when you're trying to gauge oncoming vehicles. Much like Outrun, oncoming vehicles just change lanes kind of whenever they bloody well please. They don't signal, they don't telegraph it, and the models creep up on you really quick. And everything, as you can see here, is kind of disproportionately large in relation to your size. And you've really got to be careful about that. And the thing is, you have to drive strategically, because unlike in games like Outrun, where if you're approaching a corner too fast... Oh god, screwed that up. I can usually get past the first stage, but commentating might make this tricky. But this is the thing, if in Outrun, when you were approaching a corner, you didn't have to brake or take your foot off the gas necessarily. Oh man, I really screwed up. I already broke my transmission, so I can't go into 4th gear. This is not going to go well at all. So you could normally in Outrun just slam into low gear and have it act as basically an engine brake to slow you down really quick when you get into a corner. You can't do that here. If you downshift, you will over rev your engine and you will damage your engine. And you desperately need to keep your damage balanced, because you only have so many repair parts, and you can't afford to burn any you don't have to. Where this thing does get a little unfair, I think, is that you can lose your last gear of your transmission, as you can see here, by simply having it take 1 or 2 levels of damage. And when you can't shift into last gear, you have to redline your engine, which, as you can see up top, is damaging my engine. I find in this game that if your transmission gets damaged, you have very little chance of making it to the end of your stage without at least a severe time penalty. Speaking of which, you're going to see there under the damage meters up top... Oh god, I don't think my engine's going to make it. You're going to see up top there under the damage indicators 2 different timers. This is one mechanic that this game actually kind of borrows from the arcade title Road Blasters in a weird way. So you have a given amount of time to complete each stage. It's very, very, very hard to... Oh, can I make it? Can I make it? Let's see. Oh, I missed it by about a nose hair, maybe 2 nose hairs. Alright, well, we'll give this another try. So, the nice thing is it remembers what you configured with last time, so you can keep that. So yeah, you see we have the 2 timers up top. So you are given a flat amount of time in which to complete each stage. Frankly, unless you are damn good at your driving skills, it's very, very rare that you will be able to complete it with any of that time left. If you don't, then that extra minute of time above starts ticking down, which is essentially a reserve. So that's a minute of grace period that the game will give you to get to the end of your stage. The trick with that, however, is that clock does not replenish. So if you use up, say, 30 seconds of that time completing a stage, it stays at 30 seconds in the next stage, and your reserve time going forward gets that much lower. And that's where this game can get really, really diabolical, because then it becomes about not only managing the damage of your car and trying to drive sensibly so that you don't damage it, but you also kind of have to drive very aggressively because you need to stay ahead of that clock. And if you... Honestly, I could get good enough at this game when I was a kid to avoid having to do a lot of repairs, but I could never get very far in it because I would always run out of reserve time. So the game requires a very, very fine balance of sensible and aggressive driving, because you got to stay ahead of the clock, but you also got to make sure that you don't turn your car into a smoldering ruin. And it is really, really diabolical that way. It's cool though, because this is a very arcade racing game. A simulator this is most certainly not. But at the same time, it has those little extra elements, and it really allows you to mix up your gameplay experience. You know, if you actually are some kind of crazy ninja fiend and you are able to get through this game without too much trouble, you can sort of tweak the difficulty on your own as well by distributing your repair parts in a unique way, or, you know, saying that, oh, I'm going to do this without any tire repairs or without any engine repairs or something of that nature. And that's really, really cool. It actually lends a certain amount of replayability to this game. It's not like Outrun, where, you know, if you got through all the stages, yeah, there was alternate paths you could take, but those were fairly finite, and they didn't really change a lot. And that made things really kind of, you know, it only gave you a limited amount of things you could do with the game. In this one, I find it gives you a much greater variety of options and neat stuff you can do. So I actually made the checkpoint there, but you see I burned half my reserve time. So, see, I made it through one stage. So you can see this game's pretty long. That was one stage. I got several more to go, and this game gets punishingly difficult even on the second stage. And as you can see, I'm down 30 seconds of reserve time now. And because my suspension's a little bit damaged, now I can either gamble and roll with that, or I can use a repair part and fix it up, which I'm going to do here because I'm not going to get that far. And now we're in a different environment, and as you progress, as one would expect, the tracks get tougher, the enemies become more, or the enemies, the traffic, there really are, traffic is your enemy in this game, becomes more voluminous and more unpredictable. I want to say aggressive, but really what I mean is douchey, because, you know, the way they provide challenge is, like I said, by changing lanes without signaling and just sort of veering everywhere like twits. Not unlike my commute most days. But this is, yeah, this is a neat game. It is not the most shining example of the TurboGrafx. It was a launch window game, so it is fairly early on. You know, I find this soundtrack, which seems to be an attempt to ape the sort of, you know, poppy, jazzy style of Outrun, to be pretty weak. The graphics are pretty bad. Like, the colorization's okay, but the scale is really difficult to, you know, as you can see, the car models approach in a very sort of janky way. The game does run at a full-on 60 frames a second, which is nice, and it doesn't veer down. But the car models do kind of stutter towards you, and it sort of has a very janky look to it, and it is very hard to gauge where the enemies are coming from sometimes, especially when the game makes a sharp turn like that, and it's kind of, and you're going uphill and whatnot. So you can sort of see what I'm talking about. It's graphically not that impressive, but it does have nice little day progression like that, which is kind of cool. And yeah, like I said, it is brutally hard. I mean, Outrun was hard. I think this is quite a bit harder, to be honest with you. There was a game kind of like this, but it had it was a little bit more forgiving, and it was much more long form. I played it on the Atari, but I think it was on the Commodore 64 as well, called The Great American Cross Country Road Race. I'd love to do a video on that someday. That was a really good game. This is the closest thing to that, I would say. Oh man, am I going to make it through the second stage? While commentating. Wow, I'm on a roll. Guess I gotta make up for my horrible performance the first time. But yeah, this is really cool, and it's really unique. I think it's if you like racing games, or classic racing games, especially in the Outrun arcadey style, this is worth checking out. It is a fun game, and it's was one of the more unique entries on the TurboGrafx, even though it was an entry level. So you see here, this is where things get really interesting. We're racing not only at night, but we're racing on sand, which is true. A good chunk of the Paris-Dakar rally took place in the desert. So that's what we're doing here, and this is going to get really interesting. I actually do seem to have better grip, but as you can see, I have a much lower top speed because we're not on tarmac this time. This requires a bit more gear management than things did before. But this is pretty cool. I enjoy this game still. It is not the best TurboGrafx game, not necessarily the best racing game, but it is very, very, very unique. You can acquire this right now on the Wii Virtual Console, which is how I'm playing it. There was also a version released for PlayStation Network as well, which I'm pretty sure that's not a remake or an update or anything. I think it is just this version of it released in the downloadable form for that system. So you actually do have a couple of options if you want to play this digitally, which is cool. And it's a different take on the arcade racing genre, and it will most certainly challenge you, as most retro games did. That is Victory Run published by NEC and developed by Hudson Soft, may they rest in peace, in 1989 for the TurboGrafx-16. It's pretty fun. I would check it out for sure, and I definitely hope to do more TurboGrafx-16 games in the future, because I think this was an underappreciated system, and one that had some really nice gems on it that I think people should check out. My name has been Parallax Abstraction. Thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.